It was a warm, humid morning in the Montana/Idaho wilderness when the unmistakable sound of a low-flying jet rattled the trees and startled the local wildlife. The thick, green forest, carpeted in a blanket of fallen leaves, stretched out in every direction, as far as the eye could see. The air was filled with the cries of countless birds, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional snort of a startled deer. The jet circled lazily above the treetops, its sleek, black body a stark contrast against the vibrant backdrop of nature below. As it completed another loop, the pilot radioed into base, reporting that they had arrived at their designated coordinates. A second jet, identical to the first, appeared on the horizon, joining the first as they began to descend towards the ground. As the two jets leveled off, their noses dipped slightly, revealing the massive, gaping maws of their weapon bays. Inside each bay, a dozen missiles, each longer than a school bus, waited silently for the command to fire. The pilots of the jets exchanged knowing glances, their faces masks of determination and focus. They were part of a select few chosen to carry out this mission, a mission that would change the course of history forever. Their target? Hundreds of Sasquatch, creatures that had long been the stuff of legend and folklore, but now stood between the United States Army and a vital supply depot. The situation on the ground was grim. The Sasquatch were fierce fighters, their strength and size making them nearly unstoppable. The decision had been made at the highest levels: the Air Force would have to intervene. The pilots banked their jets, lining them up side by side as they approached the battlefield. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder, and the sound of combat was deafening. As they drew closer, they could make out the forms of American soldiers, fighting desperately against the massive, hairy creatures. The pilots' hearts raced, their palms sweaty inside their gloves. They knew what they had to do. With a final check of their instruments, the pilots confirmed that they were ready. A sharp click from the radio indicated that the order had been given. As one, the pilots squeezed their triggers, launching their deadly payload towards the battlefield below. The missiles streaked through the air, leaving trails of vapor in their wake, while the jets peeled off to circle around and avoid the inevitable explosions. In the distance, the two pilots watched as their missiles struck their targets. Fire and smoke erupted from the ground, momentarily obscuring the battlefield. When the smoke cleared, they saw that their strike had been successful. Dozens of Sasquatch lay dead on the ground, their bodies blackened and twisted. But they also knew that there were still many more to fight. The battle was far from over. As the jets circled back around, they spotted a group of Sasquatch dragging an injured soldier into the cover of the forest. The pilots exchanged worried glances. They couldn't just leave the soldier to his fate. With a nod, they decided to make another pass. This time, the pilots targeted the area where they had seen the injured soldier. As their missiles streaked towards the target, they held their breath, hoping that they hadn't been too late. The explosions rocked the forest, sending trees flying and leaving craters in the earth. When the smoke cleared, they saw that the Sasquatch had fled, leaving the injured soldier behind. As they circled back yet again, the pilots spotted more Sasquatch surrounding a makeshift camp where the soldiers had been trying to regroup. They couldn't let the creatures overrun the camp and wipe out the remaining resistance. With grim determination, they lined up their jets and launched another volley of missiles. The explosions tore through the camp, sending debris and flames flying in every direction. The surviving Sasquatch howled in pain and fury, but they were no match for the relentless onslaught of the jets' missiles. The pilots continued to circle and attack, slowly whittling down the numbers of the giant creatures. Finally, after what seemed like hours of relentless combat, the pilots spotted a lone figure emerge from the smoke and chaos. It was one of the soldiers, bloodied and exhausted, but alive. The pilots breathed a sigh of relief as they recognized him. He was the commander of the ground forces. As they circled overhead, the commander raised his arm in a weary salute, acknowledging their sacrifice and their courage. The jets peeled off, disappearing into the distance as the last of the Sasquatch finally fell. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of the giant creatures, and the air was thick with the smoke of their burning fur. But amidst the carnage, there was a sense of victory, and the knowledge that they had made a difference. As the sun began to set on the Montana/Idaho wilderness, the surviving soldiers began to gather their wounded and prepare for the long journey back to base. The forest was quiet once more, but it would never be the same. Among the survivors was Lieutenant Andrews, who had been the commander of the ground forces before the attack. He was battered and bruised, but alive. As he surveyed the devastation wrought by the Sasquatch, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe for the pilots who had saved them. He knew that without their quick thinking and deadly accuracy, they would all be dead. He made his way over to a nearby radio, determined to send a message of thanks and admiration. The radio crackled to life, and Lieutenant Andrews spoke into the receiver. "This is Lieutenant Andrews, commanding officer of the ground forces. I just wanted to extend my deepest gratitude and admiration to the pilots who just saved our lives. Your quick thinking and courage under fire were truly inspiring. We wouldn't be here without you." There was a moment of silence before a faint, but distinctive female voice came through the speaker. "This is Lieutenant Johnson, call sign Eagle 1. On behalf of my wingman and I, thank you for those kind words, Lieutenant. It was our pleasure to serve alongside such brave soldiers as yourselves. We'll be keeping an eye on you as you make your way back to base. Stay safe." Lieutenant Andrews nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He knew that the pilots had been through a great deal as well, and he was grateful for their camaraderie. With a final salute, he turned back to the task at hand, leading his remaining soldiers towards safety and home. The journey back to base was long and arduous, but the soldiers were buoyed by the knowledge that they had survived. They knew that the battle against the Sasquatch was far from over, but for now they could rest and recuperate. As they trudged through the forest, they couldn't help but cast glances upwards, wondering when they might see the jets once more, ready to defend them from the giant creatures that still lurked in the shadows. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they spotted the familiar shapes of the jets in the distance. They were returning, and the soldiers couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over them. As the jets circled overhead, the pilots waved down at them, acknowledging their presence. The soldiers waved back, grateful for the second chance at life that the pilots had given them. The jets peeled off once more, disappearing into the distance, but the soldiers knew that they would be back. They had proven themselves to be unstoppable together, and they would continue to fight until the Sasquatch threat had been eliminated once and for all. The war was far from over, but for now, they could rest easy in the knowledge that they had allies in the skies. As they continued their journey back to base, the soldiers could feel a newfound camaraderie growing between them. They had faced death together and survived, and now they were bound together by that shared experience. They knew that they could rely on each other in ways they never could have before. When they finally stumbled into the relative safety of the base, they were greeted as heroes. Their story spread like wildfire, and soon the world was aware of the incredible battle they had fought. News channels broadcast their heroic deeds, and people from all corners of the globe sent messages of support and gratitude. But for Lieutenant Andrews and the other survivors, the most important thing was the knowledge that they had made a difference. They had faced an enemy that most people thought didn't exist, and they had won. They had saved lives, and for that, they would always be remembered. The days that followed were spent recuperating and debriefing, with the pilots and soldiers alike sharing stories of their experiences over endless cups of coffee. The pilots would regale the soldiers with tales of their dogfights with the Sasquatch, and the soldiers would tell the pilots about the horrors they had faced on the ground. It was a strange sort of camaraderie, born out of the crucible of war and the shared belief that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. As time went on, new recruits began to arrive at the base, fresh-faced and eager to join the fight. They listened intently as the veterans of the battle told their stories, their eyes wide with wonder and respect. And as the new recruits were given their assignments and sent out into the field, the veterans knew that they were passing on the torch, ensuring that the fight against the Sasquatch would continue long after they were gone. But for now, there was peace. The jets patrolled the skies, ever vigilant, and the soldiers trained in the fields, honing their skills for the next battle. The war was far from over, but they were ready. They had each other, and they had the knowledge that they had made a difference. And that was enough.